At some point, I will shave my face and go back to being like a smooth 4.5 here on YouTube. But for now, I remain poor of hygiene, such as the signs of the end of the NBA fantasy draft ramp up season. You know, I might actually shave the second I get off air with this delightful razor from Manscaped, but we'll save that promo for a little later in the show. Welcome into the first edition of the weekly lineup show, also known as the week ahead, also known as a fantasy weekly preview, whatever you want to call it. We got the first slate of games. It's 6 days of games this week, Tuesday through Sunday. I am Dan Bespris. This, of course, is a Sports Ethos presentation, and I guess this is technically also still Fantasy NBA Today. And I'm joined by the master of the week ahead, who writes the incredible Fantasy Pass piece at Sports Ethos, breaking down every aspect of the upcoming week. That is Derek Ball at D-Ball B-Ball. What a lovely, kudos to your parents for giving you the opportunity to go with D-Ball B-Ball as a Twitter handle. I got to say, dude, I am insanely jealous because D-Bez Basket Bez does not roll off the tongue. How you been, man? What's going on?
Dan, I'm really good. You're too kind. You know what? My parents, they're just masters of branding. They knew what they were doing right off the bat, and it was meant to be.
Yeah,
Still really happy to be here.
My parents stunk at branding. Never gonna forgive them for this. My middle name is Walter. I don't know if that would go any better in any of this stuff. Probably not. But I want to dive right in because, first of all, your thread on Twitter, excellent. I hope everybody gives you a follow so that they can get this type of stuff. It's out there right now. It's actually very useful if anybody wants to have kind of a short burst iteration of some of the stuff we're going to be talking about on the show. Again, he is at D-Ball B-Ball on social. But also the week ahead piece over on Sports Ethos that has a whole lot of extra detail and also some fun, intro paragraphs that I think everybody will get a nice little kick out of. But I want to talk about a few things here because week one, this will be a little bit of a different conversation between the two of us than week 2, 3, 4, and really when you kind of settle into things, streaming is different. This is not all about streaming. We're making decisions in week one that could impact your team for an entire season. So I know I'm monologuing here a little bit, but then I'm going to be hitting you with questions rapid fire. The point I want to make for the viewers and listeners is week one weekly preview is less about trying to wedge in every single game you can and more about this sort of broad picture stuff. So, Derek, how do you approach week one from a week ahead standpoint? Because to even call it just like a week ahead kind of show almost doesn't do a service to what you're actually trying to do with the next 6 days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit it right on the head. Right at the beginning, we're pretty much on an even playing field with every other team in our league. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make quality moves instead of quantity moves. As the season progresses and you're just trying to get raw numbers on the board, yeah, you know what? You're gonna start to shift your strategy. You're gonna look for more of a short-term gain. But right off the bat, you know what? There's every season there's breakout players. There's always that player that slides in the draft that doesn't end up rostered, and some opportunistic manager is going to be the one to pick them up. And we're just trying to be that opportunistic manager by getting ahead of the trend this year.
So how do you approach, say, today, tomorrow? Because I feel like Tuesday, Wednesday is its own universe compared to every other day of the entire NBA season. Because this is everybody's first game.
Yep.
This is the moment we try to figure out, was there anything we just totally didn't see coming going into your fantasy drafts?
Well, I mean, first off, you kind of have to trust yourself in the first couple of days, not only because there's not a lot of opportunities to stream, but you know what? You drafted those players for a reason. You kind of want to see what they look like in their first game before you start making major decisions. Now, there's going to be some people, like we were talking about off air, that, maybe you've got someone with a sore toe who's not going to be ready to start the first game of the season. You might be looking to the wire to make some short-term moves. But most things being equal, you're probably not going to be looking to do very much on the first couple of days except see how your draft went. And then as you start to get the results coming in, you're going to react to it. And then that's going to give you a lot more perspective on how you're going to build for the rest of the week and what your team's going to look like moving forward. I guarantee that there isn't a single one of us out there. If we all have 13 13 player rosters. I'm sure we all didn't pick 13 players that are going to finish on our roster. So, we're just starting the process of figuring out who's going to be off first.
I did manage to figure out a way to get your tweet thread on the screen here. I'll try to make it bigger so people can see on YouTube some of the text on that. So let's say then, okay, well, let's move past that very first element we're talking about, which is, okay, how did we do research-wise going to drafts? Was there any massive surprise? I'll be honest, I can't think of like a massive surprise on opening week since Devontae Graham on the Hornets, like half a decade ago. That's like the last one that's in my head of, oh, nobody drafted that guy. He wasn't on anybody's list, and he came roaring out of nowhere to have like a top 70, 60 fantasy season. Mostly the guys that are like, even now, the ones that are like, oh, yeah, you didn't get drafted. Those are guys that are generally drafted in intermediate and expert leagues, maybe not novice ones. So moving past that part of it, which is basically, is there anybody on these first 2 days that's just this whopper of a surprise? Is there someone on your own teams that you're just like, oh, dude played 4 minutes. Maybe this isn't something I need to see through all that much. I threw this tweet thread on the screen because you immediately get into, well, what if I have a roster slot that turns into something that's kind of junk? What do you do with it then?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about right off the bat, if we're looking at a Tuesday or a Thursday, which are both 2-game days, you really might not have that many options to go with, because we're not just making moves for the sake of making moves. Like you said right off the bat, there are going to be some names out there, like you can see a Christian Wood on screen, where, you know what, there is some upside. And if you are in one of those leagues where he wasn't rostered, you are going to go for it. But ultimately, like you're really trying to find the players that are going to get the minutes right off the bat. So if you're picking a player and they're looking at having 4, 5, 6 minutes in their first game, that's not going to set a good tone for the rest of the season in a standard league. And then you talk about moving into a day like a Wednesday where 12 games are happening. That's 24 teams that are active. You're going to be really lucky if you're going to be adding anyone off the waiver wire and they can actually fit into your starting lineup. So again, there's really not a lot to be doing in the first couple of days other than reflecting on how values are shaking out and maybe trying to be lucky and catch that Devontae Graham when they break out.
Who are the teams with 2 games this week? Because that's going to take me to my next question.
Yeah, exactly. So we're, if you're looking at the screen right now, you're going to see that LA and Phoenix are both active on both of those days, being that they're the star-studded teams that the league wants to promote. Of course, they're going to get all of the juiciest days in the first week of the schedule. And then surprise, surprise, we're looking at Denver and Milwaukee for the other 2. So, really we're talking about championship contenders with really firmly established rotations, really firmly established pecking orders. And, frankly, I think everyone knows by now that if you're playing on a team with a LeBron James, a Giannis Antetokounmpo, a Damian Lillard, name a star, Nikola Jokic, you're probably not going to have a lot of bench players that are able to, collect a lot of stats. There's going to be the starters. Everyone knows about the starters. And frankly, they're all on rosters already.
What about going back to sort of the league as a whole? What do you do? So I'm going to give away one little chunk because, this is a thing people could figure out if they really wanted to. Yeah. One of the things you break down in your week ahead piece is what teams actually have 2, 3, 4, and 5 games in a given week.
Yes.
This week, everybody has either 2 or 3, right?
Yeah. So we're getting the Monday start. So, that's probably where that 4th game would have fit in for a lot of teams. But there are still, even though everyone's mostly playing a 3-game schedule, there are some that are better than others. And, if you're reading the article, you're going to find out, or the thread, you're going to find out a lot about why that is. Because not all game days are made equal. You know what? I was saying before, there was a 12-game day, there's a 2-game day. If I'm a streamer, I'm definitely looking at the games with, single-digit totals because there's just more to be gained from a competitive advantage on those days. To give you an example, we're talking about, my team of the week this week is going to be the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, anyone looking at the schedule is going to say, oh, well, they don't start until Thursday. But then if you look at the games they're playing from Thursday onwards, you're talking about, let me see here, we've got Philadelphia playing on a 2-game day, and then they play on a 7-game day and a 6-game day. Among a lot of the other competitors at the 3-game mark, there's just not that kind of opportunity. Most of these other 3-game teams have a 2-day rest period in between. So especially since we're talking from a streaming perspective here, or at least a short-term ad, there's not a lot to be gained.
do you do things differently? I know I'm bouncing to a sort of a different idea here. Do you do things differently if you have let me go back a tiny bit farther, actually.
Sure. Yeah.
So, in my mind, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree, because you're the stream master here. In my mind, there's like one scenario this opening week where I might stream a little harder, and it's if I just happen to have sort of a heavy dose of the teams that only play twice, which is the Celtics, the Nets, the Hornets, the Mavs, the Pacers, the Bucks, the Wolves, the Pels, the Magic, and the Wizards.
Mm-hmm.
If your opponent this week, because there are a lot of 3 versus 2 situations, you could end up with like a 7-8 game disadvantage. It kind of feels like you need to make up for that, because you don't want to just take like a 7-2 or 8-1 loss right out of the chute. Then you're fighting to come back. Even if you like your team, you're fighting to come back.
100%. You're exactly right there. And there are going to be some teams that find themselves in that situation. And you know what? I don't think it's the worst situation to find yourself in, because you're filling up a roster on a day where most people aren't trying to fill up their roster, which means that if you're looking at short-term ads, you're probably going to have your choice of of what's available. If you're looking at a 12-game day, or 11 games being the 2 days that you were talking about there, you're going to have that many more options to go for. And everyone's got their favorite players that they like to add, especially in the early schedule. We're really just trying to pick out the guys that we think are going to have the best seasons. And the guys that we're most confident in are going to be the ones that we're naturally going to gravitate towards. You're just going to have more options if you're in that scenario. Now, of course, it's not ideal. You don't want to be having your end of bench guys going against another team's, proper starters. But at the end of the day, there are ways to navigate that. And I touch on that in the article in the threads as well, where, if I'm sitting from behind the 8 ball when we're talking about games played, I'm probably not going to be making as much an effort to win counting stats. I'm probably going to be looking more towards high impact categories and efficiency, which are things that I'll be able to address more easily from the back of the roster, we'll say.
I'm going to pull the curtain back just the tiniest bit here for folks on YouTube. This will be another reason for folks to come over and watch this show instead of listening in the future. This is actually a snippet of Derek's week ahead piece on Sports Ethos. This is technically behind the paywall, so sorry that I gave a tiny bit away here, but it's only a tiny bit. This is just a small chunk of the overall page. And here you've highlighted your favorite and worst schedule of the week. You already talked to our listeners and viewers about the Sixers being your favorite. I see here your worst schedule of the week is the Timberwolves. Can you talk us through that one?
Well, you know what? There's a lot of optimism around the Wolves right now. So I think it's safe to say that most of their players are rostered. But the one thing that really stands out to me as far as, productivity is who they're playing. Now, first off, 2-game week. We don't like that. We never like a 2-game week in any schedule, even if the next step up is just, or even if the leading team only plays 3 games. You want to have more. 2 is not a good number, right? But there's a lot of other teams that play on those same schedules. The reason that I chose the Wolves is who they're playing. Other teams are playing some, frankly, they're not as strong defensive teams. But if you saw that screenshot that you put up there, or if our viewers saw that screenshot, I should say, you're going to know that the Wolves are playing the Raptors and the Heat. Now, if I was to look at the list of some of the best defensive teams from last season, the season before, you get my point. The Wolves are starting their season against 2 of the hardest teams defensively to start against. And you're talking about a team that's mostly expected to be an offensive juggernaut behind Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns. They're going to have to work for their shots, especially against, those sort of targeted, really efficient defenses that the Heat and Raptors are known for putting out. So I'm looking at the stars on that team struggling a little bit more. I'm looking at them maybe having to take more shots, or maybe just making less of their shots, having to do more work from the free throw line. And that sort of scenario creates a need for the ancillary players to step up, the sort of players that really we target in the week ahead. You're talking about bench players. You're talking about, the 6th man. You're maybe talking about the 5th starter, who are going to be the ones that need to step up. Now, in the article, I kind of touch on this. You're talking about guys like Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley, Jaden McDaniels, the other 3 starters, who are all really more defensive players than offensive players, and none of them are really going to go out and get their own. You'd like to see it from some of them. I'm sure there's a Jaden McDaniels fan out there. I consider myself one who's going to tell you that he can do that. But you know what? That's asking a lot for him. If he's going to go out and do that, show that growth right away against, again, 2 of the best defensive teams in the league in game 1 and 2 while he's still shaking off the rust. So you know what? I'm not too optimistic about your options to add from that starting lineup, and then you can shift it towards the bench. Yes, everyone loves Kyle Anderson. Everyone loves Slomo. You know, we all know that Naz Reid's one of the best backup centers in the league. But again, you're kind of looking to these people to give you an offensive boost in this scenario where you're predicting that a defensive team is really going to kind of shut down your potential to produce counting stats. And I'm just not sure that those are the sort of players behind Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns that can really go out and get their own if these guys struggle. And so for me, if I'm looking at adding a player that could maybe give me plus value off the waiver wire, I'm not looking at a guy who I think is in a scenario where he could struggle offensively.
What are you looking for at this part of the year? If you are looking for someone, like you said, that can be a sort of a plus value add, are you looking for someone that gets a lot of minutes? Is there a stat set thing? What's the combination for you right now? Because again, week 1 is a little different than every other week.
Well, minutes is tricky because there are some players that are exceptions to the rules. I mean, everyone knows you should probably have a starter rostered at the end of the day. I mean, if they play 30 minutes, that's that many more chances for them to get stats. But it's not about the minutes. I've seen you tweet. I've tweeted myself. We've said it on air countless times about, there's a guy, if you give him 20 minutes a game, he's more than good enough. We used to say that about, Paul Reed, who actually I think is probably going to get a big minutes boost this year.
Yeah, might actually finally get those 20 minutes.
He might finally get it. Exactly. I mean, there are tons of players, more often defenders than anything else, but there are players who, even in small minutes, can really be quite impactful. Even a Nerlens Noel, it's a bit of a throwback now, but you know what? You put him out there for 15, 20 minutes a game. How many rebounds? How many steals? How many blocks? That's a difference maker. If you're talking about offensive players, yeah, you want them to have 30 minutes. I kind of talk about this in the article. There's players like RJ Barrett who you need to put them out there for 30 minutes for them to give you some sort of value because of the impact, the efficiency that they represent, and the kind of lack of a rounded stat line that they give. You really need to see scorers out there for high playing time. And when you're talking waiver wire players, it's usually harder to rely on that sort of player. So I tend to target, when I'm going out to the wire, I tend to target things like 3-pointers, steals, blocks, because I know that even the worst player on my team in terms of a skill evaluation, if they're giving me a 3, a steal, a block, I know that that's actually going to be way more impactful on my head-to-head at the end of the week than maybe a 10, 15 point per game scorer.
About how many games or weeks into the season before you do pivot harder into the strategic stream mode, which, again, and before you answer the question, I am once again kind of giving away a little bit of something for free here. I hope folks will consider a fantasy pass as they see the level of effort that goes into all the stuff in there. This is just one piece out of many. There's all these tools that are going, and Andre has given me a sneak preview of the 5 in-season tools that are, through basically a OneDrive online, kind of Microsoft Excel-ish, but not quite. These things are going to be amazing. But back to the point at hand here. So there's all this stuff. I'm going to take this down in a minute, but folks can see on the screen right now that you've listed where the back-to-backs are, where the positive schedule spots are. You have all this work done for this week, but it seems like you're not actually using it that much for this week. So when do you start to use this stuff more?
Well, I mean, some people are going to be forced into it by injuries and whatever other things we can't predict now. But if it's me, once I start to get a feel for how the playoffs are going to shake out, once you really do start to see kind of we'll say a noteworthy gap in the standings. I can't really predict exactly what the gaps will be between 1st and 8th place in a lot of leagues, but you know where you fall in those standings. And the closer you get to the middle or to the bottom, the sooner you're going to need to start considering altering your strategy. Now, if you're that team on top, if you're that team that got Nikola Jokic and paired him with a couple of other, early round players, and you're probably just going to cruise through the first couple of weeks because you won't need that extra boost from behind. But not every manager is going to have that advantage. And the ones that are going to need to take that risk, probably going to start looking at doing it, let's say week 3, week 4, once you've seen a couple of matchups against a couple of different teams where they have different strengths represented, and you really get a good idea of what your team is good at, what your team is bad at, and what could be fixed.
My last question for you before I let you go is, what if folks, because I think sometimes, and I'm extremely guilty of this, I think
Mhm.
that a lot of times I broadcast as though everybody listening is an intermediate or expert level player.
Yeah.
This is a really hard thing for us, those of us that have been staring at this for decades, to do, but I'm going to ask you to do it. And
Mhm.
apologies in advance if it kind of puts you on the hot seat a little. What would you instruct someone who is more in kind of a learning mode on the fantasy side and just getting into it? How would you try to walk them through getting settled here on week one? Start all your guys, just see what happens. Watch out for certain things, follow certain people on social. Like, what's the path for you if you were going to try to almost Sherpa somebody partway up the mountain?
Well, sure. I mean, that was a lob right over home plate for me. Who should they follow on social?
No,
Everyone with sports ethos in their tag.
that wasn't what I was.
Get a sports ethos subscription.
Obviously, the
But
news feed. Obviously,
of
the
course, yeah. You know what? You put that fantasy basketball hashtag into your Twitter or X or whatever search bar. You're going to see a lot of really, really good and sometimes mixed opinions out there. It's your job to find someone who you think speaks to speaks the most reason. I guess we'll say. If you're someone new though, and you're really trying to find out a way to make to really make a hot start for your league, you're going to want to consider streaming. You're going to want to learn about what it takes to stream. You're going to want to learn about low value days and high value days and what that means. You're going to want to talk about low value or low impact stats and high impact stats. I've kind of touched on them a couple of times already. You know what? There's the analogy about too many fish in the sea, or there's plenty of fish in the sea. Well, there's more fish in some seas than others. There's
explain
not a
that.
lot. There's not a lot of players that can give you 2 blocks per game. There's a lot of players that can give you 15 points per game. There's not a lot of players that can give you 2 steals per game, but there are that can give you 5 rebounds per game. And that's the kind of thing that you need to be considering when you're going in there. Another thing you want to talk about too is you're not following the hype. You know what? There's tons of basketball coverage out there. The guys on TNT, guys on ESPN, all these other content creators, and every other aspect of basketball. They do a great job of promoting the game. They could do a great job of telling you about that guy that's on the hot streak. They're doing a great job of promoting, the guy that had the highlight dunk or whatever. But we're not trying to get the guys that get the highlights. We're not trying to get the guys that have the flashiest stat lines and the trending stories. We're trying to get ahead of the stories. If you're hearing about someone, it's probably going to be too late to make an impact by adding them in your league. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get ahead. You're trying to anticipate who the next person is going to be. And the best way you can do that is by looking at the schedule and seeing which teams play the most games, which of those teams that play the most games play those games on the weakest days, because that is where you're going to create a games played advantage over your opponent. If everything is equal and both teams play the same amount of games and you're just waiting for the better players to win out, and I can't guarantee that you're going to have the better players than your opponent every week, but what I can do is try to help you get more games played than your opponent. And the more games you play, the more stats you accumulate. The same thing as we were saying about players with high minutes. They just get more chances to do more things. So you're looking at the most ways to have the most minutes, the most games played, and you're going to try to focus on impact categories by getting real specialists, I guess we could say. I mean, you don't want to just get the guy who's getting good 20 minutes off the bench just because he's got a great reputation, the PJ Tucker type, for example. I mean, you know what? He can really turn it up sometimes. For the most part, getting a handful of everything isn't going to do much for you. You want a bucket full of everything, or of one thing, or of 2 things. I guess I should say everything's a little bit much.
Yeah,
we can't have the world. We can't. Not everyone can take Nikola Jokic.
You can ask, damn it.
But you know what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Zach. I was just gonna say, you know what? It's all about just finding the guys who are going to win you a category, 2 categories. If you're lucky, 3. But you know what? You can't have the world. You're gonna step back in some areas whenever you add a player. There's no such thing as progress. It's just trade-offs. So what's your trade-off when you're adding a player off the wire? Is it worth it for you to go up in blocks if you're going to go down in 3-pointers when you've got a team built around guards? You have to know your team. You have to understand your strengths. You got to understand the best ways that the players that are available on the wire can amplify those strengths.
Damn.
And then you got to message your local pros for advice, because we're happy to give it. We love talking fantasy basketball.
Man, that was good. The only regret on this whole segment is that I didn't ask you that question first. Damn it. Derek.
Oh, we'll do this again sometime. Don't worry about it.
Yes, Derek and I are going to be getting together on Mondays. Today, Tuesday, because the season starts a day late. But Derek and I are going to be getting together on Mondays. We're going to give you guys the lowdown on the week ahead. You can always get the deep dive in the week ahead piece that he puts together over in the Fantasy Pass at Sports Ethos. And obviously, give him a follow over on social at DBall. Derek Ball, my man, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Dan, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure. We'll talk to you soon.
He will. We will. Ah, man. Well, I did my best, I hope, to highlight the Twitter feed. Go find it. It's a great starting spot. If you've got a couple of bucks that you feel like investing, the Fantasy Pass at Sports Ethos, that's part of what keeps the website afloat. So do check that out. And Derek's piece is a part of that as well. Again, he is at DBall on social media. Mid-show reminder before we get to some questions and some weekly lineup decisions that I'll be pulling up on the screen as well, that this show is brought to you by our pals. Make sure it's right side up at manscaped.com. I continue to await. It's in the mail. I got a shipping confirmation today. The Lawnmower 5.0 is on the way. I'll be showing you that maybe by later this week, depending on how fast it arrives. This is the Handyman. This one is the actual electric face razor. Last week, I shaved my cheeks on air with it. Today, I don't know if it can handle. I let the hairs get a little thick on the old neckaroo here. Might actually need to go back to a lawnmower for that one. But manscaped.com, you can get anything you want over there. I also have, and I've done this before too, I have the luxury nail kit that's also right here on my desk. This is not me doing this because I'm on a show. I actually have this right here all the time because I'm a fidgeter and I pick my nails. And if I have that, I can not pick my nails. And that's also part of the Ethos 20% off and free shipping delight over at manscaped.com. That again is Ethos 20 is the promo code, Ethos 20, to get 20% off and free shipping on your order at manscaped.com. Couple of thoughts on the streaming side from my own weird brain, basically reflecting what Derek said, which is, I think a lot of folks, and I've already had people ask me on Twitter, and I, with apologies to them, ignored the questions because I don't think this is a great week for you to be out there going, ooh, should I pick up Taurean Prince and drop somebody that I drafted yesterday? I mean, yeah, Taurean Prince might have 2 or 3 3-pointers tonight, but you did all this research on leading up to your fantasy draft, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of research, and you picked these guys at the end of your draft, probably because you have some sort of faith that they have a shot at the very least of making it to a next level, of providing a season-long boost to your team. Now, I know a lot of people that actually drafted their 13th, 14th player with the express intent of playing that player on opening night. Like they drafted Lakers and Nuggets and Suns and Warriors that play tonight with the intention of dropping them after Thursday or whatever. And that's fine. But most of us, with our 11th, 12th, 13th round picks, we went out and we got guys that we thought, if things break right, this could be a top 80 per game player. 14th round, 15th round, you start to get into, 160, 170 picks deep. Fine. Those guys, maybe you don't really care that much how they perform. Maybe those guys are like 1% chance flyers. If you want to exchange those dudes, that's fine. That's deeper rosters than most of these Yahoo public leagues have. But for me, unless something insane jumps out in this first game, and it's not because somebody's out, because like Bradley Beal is likely out for the Suns and Booker is questionable, although it sounds like he wants to play, and other pieces of news. Let's see what else is going on here. Terrence Mann is likely out for the Clippers in their first ball game. Luka Doncic is questionable. Jared Allen is out. Darius Garland is questionable. These guys are going to miss games when their teams play. There's going to be that. And you might see somebody fill in, which we've referred to as a burger board player on Fantasy NBA Today before. This is not the kind of thing where you break the bank to go get an injury replacement. This is a time where you play it chill. See how the guys do that you thought had a chance to be a full season play 2 days ago. Before you're just like, and you pull all the plugs out of the machine because one guy had a decent game because Bradley Beal was on the shelf or something to that effect. So please do take it easy in that regard. And that's my overarching thought on that one. Another piece of information here for those that are making weekly lineup decisions is where you're generally looking at the players that are or are not injured right now. Going through some of the top names on the board, Luka being questionable. He's a guy you're starting. Darius Garland is questionable. I would start him as well. James Harden, you're probably not starting, would be my take, because it doesn't sound like he actually wants to show up. Who are some of the other guys that are either questionable or out that are near the top? Jared Allen, you're benching this week. It sounds like he could miss actually the entire first week of the season. Bradley Beal, I'm probably playing. It's a little bit questionable, but they do have a 3-game week. So if we can get 2 out of him, I think I'd feel pretty good about that. So I'll go with a yes on Beal. Jeremy Grant and Anthony Simons, I think, are both questionable, but I'm starting them. Kuzma's questionable. Draymond Green is out. I think I'd probably bench him because I don't expect him to be much better than a top 100 play anyway. And so if he misses another game, now you're really going underwater there. And then in terms of other guys that are right near the periphery, Zach Collins is questionable. Unfortunately, you're going to have to make a call on him today. I don't know that he's good enough to roll the dice if he only ends up with a 1-game week. So I would probably sit him. You're sitting Jaden McDaniels. You're obviously sitting Bojan Bogdanovic because we got word that he's out for a month. And I think that's basically it for the guys that could actually move the needle a little bit for weekly lineup decisions. Let's get to some questions. This is everybody's favorite part of the weekly lineup show. If you've got a question and you're watching live, this is a great time to put it in there. If you're listening to this show after the fact, first of all, you don't have that much time to listen to it and then still set your lineup. I would strongly recommend coming aboard and watching this one live as it's being recorded. All the other ones, your experience is not going to be all that different. This particular show, where you're looking ahead at the week and an opportunity to throw some questions in a chat room that might get on air, here you go. I am not going to be answering every question in the YouTube chat. I should also mention that, because if you've got like hey, here's my 3 guys on my bench, which one do I put in there? This is more about me trying to find questions that apply to more than one team, if at all possible. Some days that'll be 2 or 3 questions. Some days that'll be 15 to 20. Today we'll probably keep it a little bit on the shorter side because it is week 1. I don't know that people have a ton of questions yet, but let's see what we've got as I navigate over to the chat room. Nils. No, this one's kind of specific, but maybe we can talk about the players. Opinion on a Porzingis and Tyus Jones for Brook Lopez and Jeremy Grant trade. I like the Porzingis side. He's far and away the best player in that trade package. And typically, unless you're in a very deep league, you're looking to maximize the top players on the board. Porzingis is a top 15 fantasy player. In Boston, he might be more like top 20. Brook Lopez takes a step back. He's probably the second highest ranked player on this board. And then Tyus Jones and Jeremy Grant are a little bit of a wash, frankly. Maybe Jeremy Grant's a little bit better, but Porzingis is so far beyond what you can expect from the other guys that in general, a good rule of thumb is you take the side of the trade with the best player in the deal and just understand that you can work around the edges some other time. Those guys just move the needle in a way that the middling players or slightly later players don't. Is Christian Braun startable? Not in 12-teamers, I don't think. And this is the kind of stuff we're gonna be looking for tonight because Bruce Brown is gone in Denver. Christian Braun's going to see some of those Bruce Brown minutes. You might see Justin Holiday even take a few of those minutes. I wouldn't start him in a games cap format. If he's like the last player on your bench and you're in full stream mode here on day 1, okay, have at it if you want. Like, he'll probably play 20 some odd minutes tonight and do something with them. But to say I'm expecting a lot would be, I think, a dramatic overestimate. Life of Cruz has the moment you realize you don't have any Suns, Lakers, Warriors, and 76ers players. Oh, I have one team like that. I actually do. I'm with you, Life of Cruz, not Cruz. Or Cuz. Life of Cuz. I have one team out of all of my cash leagues where I don't have a single player at any of those 4 clubs. And so tonight is a little bit of a buzzkill for that league. But this is why I'm in so many leagues. No, that's not why. P.S. Loving all the content you've put out, Dan. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yeah, I've tried to do a lot, like a lot, this fantasy run-up. I'm trying to do more shows in Twitter or shows in YouTube stuff this season than years past. I'll try to keep that going a little bit, but at some point we will kind of dial it back a little. Cambria says, keep up the good work, Mr. Besbris and company. Appreciate the daily content. You are welcome. Is there a way to access the pass even for a different region? I'm assuming, yeah, the fantasy pass should be available for folks anywhere. It's all just through sportsethos.com. Fantasy pass is $6 a month. It's got all sorts of cool tools in it that we're going to be rolling out here over the next week. And obviously it has all the draft content in it as well. So if you already have the fantasy pass, then you already have access to all this stuff that we've been talking about on today's show as well. Samuel says, Miles Turner and Keegan Murray or Kristaps Porzingis and John Collins. See, now this one's tighter because Miles Turner and Kristaps Porzingis are kind of closer to a wash. In fact, they might be ranked right next to each other this year at the end of the day. So then it's a question of who do you like more, Keegan Murray or John Collins? I think I'd take the shot on the Collins side because I do think that he has maybe a little more per game upside if things break right. Maybe with Murray, you have a better chance of things of floor. Murray's got the better floor. Collins has the better upside. I'll take the Porzingis and John Collins side. Because frankly, I think Porzingis and Miles Turner could be drafted almost interchangeably this year, and they probably both end up around 65 games played. David says, how do you feel about Bilal Coulibaly? Bilal Coulibaly. I've messed that up a bunch of times. He seems really hype. Learning curve. Can I just say learning curve and leave it at that? I don't think you're going to get much out of the shoot. If you do get a bunch out of the shoot, I mean, I've been wrong before, but there's a learning curve that doesn't really hit until real NBA regular season stuff starts coming around the bend. Nils says, I just finished my draft. I landed Halliburton, Kevin Durant. What the JJJ, Miles Turner, Jamal Murray with my first picks. God bless the ESPN draft board. Holy crap. Maybe I should play more on ESPN. Usman says, talk about the Euro MVP Sasha. I think that's Vesenkov on the Kings. I don't think he's going to play more than about 20 minutes a game to start. So I wouldn't worry too much about it here in 12 teamers. Stephen Vallejo says, or Vallejo, depending on if you pronounce it the Northern California way or the actual way. Should I give Rocco one last go for the OMBS, would be the old man Vesper squad? No. The only way Rocco has value, I believe, is if the Clippers have to trade all of their wings to get James Harden. And then it's like a Harden, Kawhi, Paul George, Ivica Zubats, and nobody, and Russell Westbrook, and that's the entire team. And then Rocco is like sitting on the bench by himself with nobody else there. But they have too many damn wings. There'll be days where he gets to play 20 minutes. There'll be days where he plays 6, and I just can't trust the in-between. Now, if we see him come out on day one and play like 27 minutes, I would do it, but I don't think you need to do it before the season starts. And I think that's where we'll leave it on the Q&A part for now because my voice is tired. I did a hit this morning on VSiN. This is my second pod of the day, and we've been doing 1 to 1.5 to 2 shows every single day for a month and a half. Wait, ES sneaks a 2 questions got snuck in here right at the end. My apologies if asked already. Would you play KCP tonight in Roto? Nah, he's going to be around like a 95 range guy. So I think you could, and it really wouldn't be the end of the world. The question is, do you think you get a warm KCP on opening night? And usually the answer is that the shooters take a day or two to kind of get their legs underneath them from a rust standpoint. But to that degree, you're getting a little bit cute. I probably would. I think he gets you a couple of 3-pointers and a steal, but I don't think he gets much beyond that. So if you're looking at your team and you're like, this team's going to need steals and threes as we go, then I'd say yes. But if you're in a Roto situation where your better picks, your guys that maybe that aren't playing today or your top 9 or 10, if that's already a strong team in steals and threes, then I don't think I would blow a game on KCP. Chris Bossum says, any news on Jarrett Allen? All we know is that he's out, and the latest report from Chris Fodor mentioned that he is potentially out through the home games over the weekend as well. So I think they're expecting him to miss a week. That would keep him on my bench in any weekly league, and I wouldn't expect to see Allen until next week. So just start getting your expectations in check on the Jarrett Allen front, and that way you're not disappointed when he doesn't play for 3 or 4 games. Okay, Thanks for watching, everybody. This was week 1 preview. We'll be back with Derek for another one of these on Monday. Obviously, I will be back with you tomorrow to break down the first 2 box scores of the first damn NBA slate, which, by the way, Lakers at Nuggets, Suns at Warriors. Likely no Bradley Beal in that Suns game. No Jared Vanderbilt for the Lakers. No Draymond Green for the Warriors. So things that we're kind of keeping an eye on tonight. If you want to do this very quickly for the Lakers, what is Taurean Prince actually going to be doing this season? Hard to know while Vanderbilt is out, but that's something to keep a little watch on. I'm actually most interested in D'Angelo Russell because they brought in Gabe Vincent, but D'Lo had a hell of a preseason. He was playing hard. He played defense during the preseason. He looked good. He looked confident. I think D'Lo might surprise some people, but I am waiting to find out. For the Nuggets, it's about who takes the Bruce Brown minutes. Is it Christian Brown? Is Moore going to the starters off a championship run? I don't think that would be a good idea. Do they trust the youngsters more? Does Justin Holiday squeeze out a few? For the Suns, it's really about whether or not Yusuf Nurkic gets a full complement of minutes and then who can soak up some of the other stuff besides the superstars, although I wouldn't make any large sweeping decisions while Beal is out. And for the Warriors, with no Draymond, we know Kevon Looney is almost a guarantee for 9 rebounds plus. Everybody else, and myself included, would like to know what's going to happen with Jonathan Kuminga this year. With Draymond out, he would seem to have a slightly larger opening here on opening night. But I'm more interested in what happens with Kuminga after Draymond comes back. If Kuminga's a free agent in your league and he has a big game, you kind of need to then add him just to see how it shakes out, even though I would put out there that I don't think it's going to be a consistent thing once Draymond is around, but you don't want to be the person with your pants down if he actually does start to put up a little more consistent stuff. We'll start doing more of that tomorrow. My thought in my mind, and we'll see how the schedule stuff actually takes place, is that in the morning on most days, we'll break down the previous night of games. We'll go through the box scores, any other pieces of news that hit. If we have time in the afternoon, specifically on larger card days, maybe we'll even try to do kind of a nightly preview sort of show, but that won't be every night. I simply won't have time to do one of those every single day. So there'll be days where we sort of mash it all together into one morning show. There'll be days where we split it up, depending on how much content there is. Make sure to stay tuned, and you'll see it when you see it. Thanks again to Derek. He is at DBallBball on Twitter. I'm at Dan Besbris. You know you guys need to find us over on social because the season has begun, and that's where the news happens the fastest. Like, rate, subscribe, tell your friends. See you tomorrow.